The first I knew about dementia-friendly communities was when Ita Buttrose called me in January 2013 from Singapore, of all places, to say she'd just seen a segment on television in the lounge in Singapore about dementia-friendly societies in Belgium and parts of Europe. So as always, we're prepared to learn from what's going on overseas, and we looked for good speakers. So we had Steve Milton's wife in May this year come and talk to us about dementia-friendly societies. And my staff, who are great judges of character, have already told me that Steve is the nicest, friendliest, and most interesting of all the public speakers we've had over the last 6 years, which is a real condemnation, because my staff are pretty hard to please, as I know only too well. So Steve is very much a grassroots person. He manages something called Dementia Innovations, and we're very lucky to have him. So please welcome him.
Blimey, no pressure then. Okay, I just need to check my various bits and bobs, right? Dobber, flies, notes. I tell you what, how good were those movies? And one of the things that really struck me about them was that apart from the really great movies that we make at Innovations, it's one of the first ones I've seen where the music isn't in a minor key. Do you know what I mean? It just keeps the tone positive. Right, bear with me just one sec while I get my notes up. Okay. Right. Now then, I try and make my presentations as dementia-friendly as I possibly can. And one of the main features of that is I'd like to extend an invitation to people with dementia that if you have a comment that you want to make or a question you want to ask, that you ask it or you make it straight away. Because people with dementia have told us one of the things they hate in meetings is being told, hold that thought. You know, not ideal. So if you want to say anything, if you want to hurl abuse or chuck a cup at me, then you know, go ahead and do it straight away. And we've got a roving mic at the back there. Okay, I'd like to thank, obviously, Alzheimer's Association Australia for inviting me over. Not exactly under false pretences, you know. We've got a lot of really good grassroots stuff going on in the UK, and it's being done by lots of different players, as you'll know, Leslie, having been over. Not just the Alzheimer's Society of the UK, but lots of smaller organisations. But what that has meant is that our stuff is all over the shop. Compared to the resources I've been looking at over the last few days that you've launched here, which are absolutely world class, and I have to congratulate you for those, and hope you don't notice when we nick them off you. Right, okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about what our experience has been in the UK. I'm going to be showing you a few videos. I've got a kind of roughish plan that I might or might not stick to. I think it was Leslie said to me outside, I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say, and I thought to myself, so am I. Maybe before I could go on, for those of you who aren't, you know, uniquely familiar with the concept of dementia-friendly communities, I'd like to ask you to think about the big flagship dementia service in your neighbourhood, whether it's a day centre or whatever it is. Think about that service. Think about what you'd see if you went there. Think about the sounds that you'd hear. Think about what sort of smells you might encounter. Think about how you'd feel as you walk through those doors. Okay, I want you to put that to one side of your mind for a moment. I'd like you now to imagine that you've just been to see your doctor. And your doctor says to you that, I'm sorry to tell you that you've got the very early stages of Alzheimer's disease. How many of you are now going to make a beeline for that big service in your community? Oh, I dread the day when someone goes, yeah, I'm gonna. No, of course you won't, because you know what people with dementia tell us time and time again, that when they get their diagnosis, they want to carry on doing the stuff they've always done. The stuff of normal life, getting on a bus, go into the pub, go into a restaurant, go into the gym, carrying on working, carrying on raising kids, not go to a day centre. Now, this is not to say there's not a need for specialist services at various points in one's journey through dementia. Of course there is. But predominantly, people with dementia tell us they want to live their lives in their communities. And the reality is actually that they are. In the UK, 2/3 of people with a diagnosis of dementia live in their communities. And I was asked by a journalist yesterday, well, why should we do this? So, well, actually, I'm going to ask you, well, how can you not? How can you not, with 2/3 of people with dementia living in their communities? And we know what happens when people with dementia don't stay connected, when people with dementia experience stigma and misunderstanding. In our experience in the UK, they tend to withdraw into their own homes and pretty quickly go into a major spiral. Okay, you talk about disengagement, that's exactly what happens to people in the UK. A lot. Now, I want to take a bit of a detour before I talk any more about dementia-friendly communities, because I have some discomfort. Oops, wrong computer. I have some discomfort around the whole use of the word dementia-friendly. And I'll tell you why. Meet Lady Bountiful, helping the little cripple across the road. I hope he's grateful. See, there's something in the use of the word dementia-friendly which speaks the language of largesse, of beneficence, and that is just somehow people with dementia should be grateful that we are making efforts not to unfairly discriminate against them. And the similarities between where we are now in the dementia field and where people with physical and sensory disabilities were in the 1970s and 80s is really striking. It's really striking. And one of the things that the pioneers of disability movement did in the 70s and 80s was start to challenge what they call the model of disability that says, you're the problem, mate. The problem is your legs don't work. And that's the main issue. And people with disabilities start thinking, really? Okay, well, what if it's not just us? What if it's, some of you can hear me now, can't you? Those of you at the front can hear me, some of you at the back can't hear me. That's not because you're deaf. It's because you're in an environment which is disabling, because I'm not using a microphone. You may have heard that. I'm giving you an example of a disabling environment. And people with physical disabilities started to talk about this, saying, look, it's not just the fact that I have these various impairments, my legs don't work, it's the fact that I'm living within a society where the environment is disabling me, where I experience stigma, and where I'm encountering organisations that are discriminating against me. Let me give you an example of that, and to draw us back to dementia. My father had dementia. In fact, he was a greedy bugger. He had many dementias. He had Alzheimer's, he had infarct dementia, and he had Korsakoff syndrome because he'd been an alcoholic for a lot of his life. Aside from that, he loved swimming. It was what he did, the main thing that kind of kept him afloat, if you'll pardon the pun. Now, in the UK, we have equalities legislation that makes it unlawful for local, or in fact any service provider, to unfairly discriminate on the grounds of disability. So we have ramps up to public buildings. We have hearing induction loops for people who are hearing impaired. Now, my father had no problem with that. He could walk up the stairs of the swimming pool, no problem. He wasn't hearing impaired. He could hear the announcements. But he couldn't understand the information that he was sent about the new opening hours. So he stopped going swimming because he couldn't face having to ask people. He felt embarrassed. Because he stopped swimming, he basically then, sorry Dad, he sat on his backside for the rest of his life watching TV. His dementia took a real downward spiral. He became very, very depressed, which, by the way, had a much more profound impact on his quality of life than his dementia did, ever. And what you have there is a prima facie case of unfair discrimination by a local authority, and a prima facie case, I think, of the need to encourage a different kind of conversation about dementia, where we look not just at the fact that someone might have a few difficulties with, perhaps with memory or everyday tasks, but where we live in a society where we can make massive changes to make life easier for people with dementia to live well. Okay, so what do we mean by dementia friendly in the UK? Well, we've asked people with dementia what they think a dementia friendly is about, and this is what they tell us. It's a good place to live with dementia. It's a place where you can find your way around, where you can be safe, where you can use local facilities, pubs, buses and so on, keep your mates and your social networks, and where people know about dementia and can support you. I tell you what, that's not a big ask, is it? Or am I missing something? Because we know, don't we, that for many people, as soon as you get a diagnosis of dementia, your mates disappear. A lot of your family disappear. Why is this? Because they're afraid of dementia, because they don't understand it, because they don't know what to say, because they're worried they might say the wrong thing. Tell you what, that's one big advantage actually that you have in Australia compared to the UK, and I'm at risk here of falling into some really gross cultural stereotypes, but I'm from London originally, and those of you that have been on the tube in London will recognise that we would rather bite off our own feet than talk to each other. We would, I mean, seriously. And we hear time and time again that the most important thing about a dementia-friendly community is not the signage or the dementia-friendly environments, although that is important. It's the people you encounter within it. Now, I've been in Sydney for 3 days now. I've had people talking to me. What is going on? I thought to myself. That's a really big advantage for you. Your strapline is start a conversation. So not only are you more inclined to talk to each other, you also have a more outdoors culture. Mainly because it's not pissing down with rain for 10 months here like it is in the UK. So, you have got some significant advantages there. Okay, a quick bit of context. In many ways, very similar to the situation in Australia. We've got roughly 800,000 people with dementia. It's getting bigger. Most people live in the community. We had a major boost to our work around dementia friendly in what's called the Prime Minister's Challenge, in which the Prime Minister challenged us to make improvements to health and social care, to make improvements to research, and crucially, to create dementia-friendly communities. We currently have 63 local communities signed up to become dementia-friendly. And what that means at a local level differs from place to place and is very much a reflection of the local character, but also of what people with dementia want. So in Plymouth, for example, Plymouth's a big maritime city on the southwest coast, got big connections with the Navy. It's also very, very close to Dartmoor, which is, for us anyway, a largish area of wilderness. For you, it's like probably your back garden or something. But so in Plymouth, they've done a lot of work with naval support services, making sure that the Navy know how to support servicemen and women who develop dementia or who are caring for someone, and the search and rescue teams that have to find people a lot on Dartmoor have all been trained up in how to support people with dementia and how to understand how dementia impacts people. That's just one example. I'll come to more as I work through my presentation. Here are some more of the drivers for dementia-friendly communities. So we're living longer. In other words, there are more people with dementia. People are getting their diagnosis earlier. When I first started work for Alzheimer's Society back in 1994, the vast majority of people get their diagnosis really late, often when communication was very badly affected. So I would say probably 100% of the calls we took to the National Helpline, which I ran, were from carers. That's changed a lot now, and people are getting their diagnosis earlier and earlier and earlier. In fact, I had to pick up a journalist from ABC Gold Coast this morning I was live on the air, and she said, well, obviously, people with dementia, need to be supervised when they're in the community. And I thought I'd love to introduce you to Kate Swaffer. So I had to sort of say, well, look, that may be the case for some people with dementia at certain points in their journey. It was certainly the case in the past. But these days, the majority of people, when they get their diagnosis, have many, many years where they're able to live independent lives without needing to be supervised. But there is still kind of that perception there among some people. Another big driver is, of course, the baby boomer generation, of which I'm just at the tail end of. We grew up in the 60s and 70s. We know about the language of civil rights. We are not going to put up with the same standards of service that my parents put up with. My parents wouldn't have dreamed of challenging the doctor. Anyone with a title or a white coat, and we're a different generation. We want more out of life. We know that we have the right to that, the moral right, the ethical right, and increasingly, I would suggest, the legal right. As well as all of these nice carrots, there is rather a big stick that we can carry behind our backs at the same time. You can't pretend also that austerity wasn't a big factor in the UK. Our economy got buggered up, along with lots of others, and it's maybe no surprise that about a year or so after, when the coalition government took over, that suddenly the government rediscovered community, having permanently dismantled it in the 1980s. Sorry, that's going off point there somewhat, but amazingly, we now have a big society which is able to support people with dementia that in a way that doesn't cost anything. Well, I'll come on to that a little bit later. So it is unfortunate, really, that the drive towards dementia-friendly got tied up with what has now become quite a discredited political concept, the concept of big society. Now, unfortunately, big society was launched by a government advisor called Steve Hilton, who looks almost identical to me. My name is Steve Milton. So I was banging on about dementia-friendly communities while people thought that I was actually from the coalition government, trying to talk about big society. But anyway, that's kind of my problem. The other thing that's happening, of course, is that businesses are waking up to the idea that actually a lot of our customers have got dementia. If they can't shop in my supermarket, they'll go next door. And they're actually realising that this idea we have that all older people are skint and all people with dementia are skint is actually not true. People with dementia and older people have spending power. If they can't come to you as a business, they'll go somewhere else. Okay. And now here's some figures. I mean, basically, don't bother to read all that, but basically, it has been worked out by economists in a proper peer-reviewed sense that if we can delay the premature entry into residential care by just 5% of people with dementia by a year, we will save £55 billion sterling. I did some sums this morning and worked out, hey, what if we could delay the premature entry to residential care of 100% of people with dementia? Why do people go into residential care before they need to? Usually because they become disengaged. Simple as that. Now, if we can prevent that by giving people with dementia a fair go, I've worked out that we can save £1.1 billion sterling. What's that in? That's about, well, that's over 2 billion Australian dollars, I think, which is not a bad amount of money to have in your back pocket. Those of you in politics, anyway. Okay, now a quick update on our Prime Minister's challenge. It's been interesting, this, because it's given the whole dementia-friendly movement thing a real top-down impetus, which is both good and potentially it could be a bit of a disaster, because we're about to experience potentially a change. We've got an election coming up next year, unless Scotland leave next week, in which case we certainly won't have an election next year. But if we do, we might see support for dementia-friendly communities as a political strategy begin to diminish. That is why keeping it grassroots level and involving people with dementia, especially the loud, snotty ones who are prepared to kick the rest of us up the backside is really important, because it keeps it real. And it doesn't mean it depends upon top-down government initiatives. Anyway, that aside, it's had a lot of success. It's meant that we've got 63 places in the UK now committed to becoming dementia-friendly. There's a recognition process for dementia-friendly communities in place. There are dementia-friendly awards, so they're very publicly rewarding good practice, which has had a major impact, because basically it gets on the telly, and that's really important. I'm part of a committee that sits on the British Standards Institute, where we're trying to actually come up with a code of practice for dementia-friendly communities. It's a total mess. It really is. Again, and this is because there are so many organisations in the UK working on dementia-friendly communities. There's us. We're tiny. There's Alzheimer Society, and there's dozens of other organisations, as Leslie will know. And what that means is we're trying to pull together this multiplicity of different documents and different policies and different strategies into a single coherent code of practice. It's going to be tough. And again, the advantage you have is certainly, I think, in Australia, Alzheimer's Society occupies a position that's enabled it to come up with fairly significantly more quickly than we have a coherent approach to community development. Right, we're working with businesses across retail, finance, transport, and so on. There's the Dementia Friends campaign. Now, this is a really big campaign, basically to try and persuade us to be human beings. Yeah, I know. What they're trying to do basically is raise awareness and sign up 1 million people who've been on a 45-minute awareness course, and actually it's potentially really, really good. It might have been better if you'd not destroyed our communities in the first place, but hey ho, let's not be bitter. And they're actually aiming for 1 million dementia friends by March of next year, and that could make a significant difference. So so you might have some young lad, for example, who perhaps sees someone in a queue in a shop struggling, and maybe at that point decides not to sit there going, oh, the little things that can make people with dementia feel really uncomfortable. It's that little bit of extra information. And we also got 140 schools who are going through a dementia awareness program, and we've seen some really good stuff produced by kids, especially younger kids. Many of you will know about sometimes the unique relationships that can exist between very young children and people with quite advanced dementia. When my dad was dying with dementia a couple of years ago, my son would have been about 18. No, he wasn't even probably about a year old. But he couldn't have given a stuff about my dad's dementia, and actually they got on great. Although we did have people saying, are you sure that he's safe? Yeah, I'm sure he's safe. I'm not so sure whether my dad's safe, mind you, but that's another story. Okay, now, one of the bits of work that we're involved in Innovations in Dementia is we're working with 60 local Age UKs. Age UKs they used to be called Help the Aged, basically. They're older people's organisations. And what they've realised is that we have got a unique advantage in supporting people with dementia to live well, and that is we're not a dementia organisation. They provide lots of stuff like information and advice and support, so we're working with them to make their mainstream services accessible to people with dementia. So essentially we're working to make them dementia friendly at a local level, and this is the kind of framework that we've been using, and it's one which looks likely to be developed as a framework for British standards as well. Let me run you through it. Now this works in the UK whether you're a local chip shop or whether you're Tesco's. It also works, by the way, if you're an individual living with dementia or a family living with dementia. All of these domains are important. Let me show you how. So the first thing that we look at, not the first thing, but the first thing on the presentation is the place, and by that we mean not just the physical environment, but also written materials. And what we ask when we go to an organisation, we say, how accessible are your buildings? How easy is it for people with dementia to find their way around? The three of us, we went to ABC this morning, myself and some colleagues, and we could not get out. We had someone had to come and help us, and that was a really good example of a not particularly anyone-friendly Which again, there's the point. Dementia-friendly environments are more friendly for everyone. We insist that organisations involve people with dementia in planning of new developments and any redesign. We insist they get people with dementia involved in walking the patch, by which I mean, bring someone with dementia in. They'll tell you how easy your environment is to use or not. What's your public transport like? Is it accessible? What about your written and published information? And again, we come across some really great examples of really awful information that no one can read. Let me give you an example. There was a local organisation who produced information about their handyman service. This is a service for people with dementia, and it read something like, I won't name the organisation, it says so-and-so organisation with funding from blah, 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 in association with blah, 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 is able to offer this unique blah, blah. And I'm falling asleep when I'm even reading it, right? So we did a redesign with them based on guidance from people with dementia. New leaflet. Big picture of a couple of people wearing tool belts. Do you need help fixing stuff in your house? There's a slogan in the UK. Does it do what it says on the tin? And using plain English is probably the most significant thing you can do to improve your written publications. Does it do what it says on the tin? And small changes can make a huge difference. Let me show you. Right, what would you do, right, if you walked up to those doors? Now, when I was there, I was there for about 2 hours, I saw 3 people walk up, and this is what they did, right? And you know what they did then? They walked away, right? Those could well have been people with dementia. Going to that organisation, this was a local older people's organisation who'd just been given a pop-up shop by a bank. Those could well have been people with dementia who'd plucked up the courage to go out to get some help and support and information. They clearly felt like a right idiot, as you do, when you're pushing and you're pulling and it's all going wrong. Now, people sometimes say, "Oh, well, I'm making environmental change. It gets really expensive, and labour intensive, and just pick up the bloody thing and move it 3 foot to the right." Which it wasn't expensive. And most of the changes that we see are really, really straightforward. And again, a great way of finding out what they need to be is involving people with dementia in an audit of your environment. Here's another one. These were the comments of a person with dementia. The sign on the door says automatic door, but you actually have to push the pad to the left of the door to open it. I assumed all I had to do was stand there and it would open. And I felt silly when it didn't. You ever had this? You see it all the time. A sign on the door saying push the pad to open the door would make it clearer. So why don't we do this? Having said that, I was down in the tube station. Do you call it tube station? Underground? The underground train at Circular Quay. Compared to London, the London Underground, it's a dream. I could understand the ticket machine. Without having a breakdown. The maps were clear and easy to understand. When I was looking at the map, someone came up and said, "Can I help you, mate?" A member of staff, And maybe, again, at the risk of falling into gross cultural stereotypes, I'm finding a lot of stuff I'm encountering is written in plain English, without all the kind of lardy-dars and fiddle-daddles that we tend to attach to stuff to make ourselves feel like scientists or important in the UK. Don't change. This video, which you will provide the links for you, is basically about a bus company that provide really, really good training for their bus drivers. And it's made a huge difference. 2 things: training for bus drivers to make them aware of how dementia impacts on people, and cards for people with dementia that basically say, I have dementia. I would have made one big improvement to those cards. I would have made them had blank areas so people with dementia could say, I have dementia, and this means that, because actually, I have dementia, actually, so what? That tells me absolutely nothing that's going to help me help you. You might not, you might have memory problems, you might not, you might have communication problems, you might not. But, you know, the scheme is working really, really well. And again, transport's a really important thing for people with dementia, many of whom, although not all, but many of whom will lose their driver's license post-diagnosis, especially in rural areas. It's huge. Okay, now this is the most important part, really, to my mind, and people with dementia certainly tell us it's the people that you encounter that make your heart sing. It's not the environment, and that's again why the bus company focused on training the drivers. Just a little bit more awareness, a little bit more understanding. So we need to challenge stigma. We need to raise awareness, because stigma is there. I encountered it this morning. You know, people with dementia need supervision. That's stigma. I don't know what else to call it. It's stigma. You know, it's not with ill intent. It means well, but it's still stigma. Now, these don't have to be big interventions. You know, we don't need to be, you know, telling businesses to send people on 3-day-long training courses. If we do, they'll laugh in our faces apart from anything else. And some of the resources, for example, that Alzheimer Society have produced, and there's one in your new guide on for customer-facing staff. If you've got a good organisation which is already customer-focused, they're already 95% of the way there. And if their staff have basic common sense, a good heart, and a good pair of ears, that's pretty much all they need, you know. The rest of it is just information. Which is why something like Dementia Friends, a basic 45-minute awareness raising, or something like the Guide for Customer-Facing Staff is, for many people, is actually all they need. We don't need to create people who are considered experts in dementia. We just need to give people that little bit of information, that little bit of insight they need to challenge their own ideas. As I said, the rest of it is just information. By the way, if you're an organisation and you're looking at training, I might get into trouble here, please don't pay for it, because there are some really, really good resources available to train your staff, available free of charge. You've got one in Tasmania, is it the massive MOOC? Yeah, in the UK, and available here, of course, the Social Care Institute for Excellence, SCI, produce an excellent course. Our bread and butter used to be training. When we first started 7 years ago, I don't do it anymore. A, because I hate it. I hate going into care homes. But also because how can I charge for training when really, really good stuff's available free of charge? And don't overdo it. You know, again, it's not about creating experts. It's just about giving people that little bit of extra information they need to make a difference. Networks are the next thing we look at. Now, networks are massively important. Massively important. And as a community, you know, without making connections with the right people, you're really, really going to struggle. In the UK, we have a National Dementia Action Alliance, which pulls together massive organisations like Alzheimer Society and Department for Health and Tesco's and Lloyds Bank, and little tiddlers like us, who are 3 people. And each of us make a statement about what we're going to do across a range of domains to improve the quality of life of people with dementia. And every year we have to give evidence to show what we've done. Those local action alliances are replicated at a local level and are an incredibly powerful way of actually getting things changed at a local level. So, you know, the kind of people that we think about involving, some of the words might be different. I know the way that you organise local government differs from the UK, but certainly within a perfect Dementia Action Alliance would include local government, planning, housing, utilities, that stuff like gas and bins and all that kind of stuff. Healthcare, social care, emergency services, especially emergency responders. You know, the police force probably have more contact with people post-diagnosis than any other non-care service. And there are often people who are in distress, people who are lost, and the police really need to know what they're doing. Disaster planning as well. But also businesses, you know, just in fact, you know, forget that list. Think about what you do. Those of you without dementia, think about again what makes your life your life. All the things you can do, right? Because those are all the organisations that need to be involved locally, because they're the ones that you're going to want to use if you get your diagnosis of dementia. The restaurant, the pub, the supermarket, the corner shop, the bus company, the ferry company, so on and so forth. Everyone needs to get involved. And I tell you what the most important people are to get involved. You know what I'm going to say, right? It's people with dementia. Because unless people with dementia are involved, if it's completely top-driven, you're not going to get anywhere. You might have a bit of short-term success, you might get on the telly, you know, there'll be lots of pictures of blokes like me in suits handing over large cheques to other blokes in suits and shaking hands, but that will be about it. It won't really change the lives of people with dementia to any great extent unless they are actually involved. Okay, I'm going to skip the video again, I hope that's okay. But I will talk about it. In this video, Dementia-Friendly Crawley, it's mainly about people with dementia talking about how they're involved in setting the priorities. And again, you know, in the same way that people with dementia are involved within Alzheimer's Australia and Alzheimer's Australia New South Wales. And it shows the importance of keeping people with dementia at the heart and the start of the process of developing dementia-friendly communities. Now, how... Those of you that are thinking about how do we use our resources to make dementia-friendly communities happen, especially those of you who are coming from a health or social care background, here are the things that people with dementia tell us make a huge difference. Early diagnosis. If everyone's getting their diagnosis late, then nothing is going to happen. We're back to where we were 20 years ago. But there are services post-diagnosis that can make a massive difference as well. Now, here's how it generally happens. Not generally. Here's how it used to happen in the UK for pretty much everyone. And here's how it still happens, sadly, in a majority of cases. I'm the doctor, right? Well, yeah, I'm sorry to tell you that you've got the start of Alzheimer's disease. Here's a depressing leaflet from the Alzheimer's Society. You're okay at the moment, but go away when there's a problem. You read your depressing leaflet from the Alzheimer's Society that talks about decay, death, decline, depression, you know, and I mean, frankly, I would not even get out of bed if that was me. So there's got to be a way of providing better post-diagnostic support for people with dementia. That supports people with dementia to develop a narrative that's about hope. Not hope that they'll recover from dementia, that they won't. But I tell you what, and this might annoy some people, there is not necessarily a link between the progression of dementia and loss of quality of life. Many people with dementia do experience a decline in quality of life as they progress. That has got as much to do with their environment and I include their social environment as it has to do with their dementia. It is perfectly possible with the right support for people with even advanced dementia to enjoy quality of life. Let me give you an example of that. Because, you know, sometimes when we measure things like dementia and quality of life, when we're looking for the person, we're looking in the wrong place. I was in a care home recently that's got a big conservatory. They've also got this scruffy cat that was sitting on this woman's lap, woman with quite advanced dementia, and she was stroking its head. I could hear the cat purring from outside the. I was chatting to one of the members of staff, and I was kind of watching what was going on. And then I saw this fella pitch up, also with quite advanced dementia, using a stroller, you know, kind of like on wheels. And he went into the conservatory, and he said in quite a loud voice to the woman, he said, "I want that." And I thought, all right, there's going to be a bit of a Barney here. And do you know what happened? He got down on his knees, the cat jumped off, he put his head on her lap, and she started to stroke his head. And I thought to myself, there is a woman who has quality of life, because the ability to show care and concern for other people is a prime indicator of someone who is connected to themselves at the deepest level. If we measure quality of life in terms of the ability to do the mini mental state exam or the ability to do tough stuff, we will fail. And crucially, we will fail people with dementia. If we look for it somewhere else, Anyway, that's another presentation. I digress. So these are the services that people with dementia tell us they want. One-to-one support. You know, it used to be called mates. We went to a presentation down in Cornwall, which is a bit of the West Country, which is quite rocky. And there was a guy there, young guy, 45 years old, newly diagnosed with dementia. The only thing he wanted to do was go fishing, which he'd done all his life, but he felt a bit dodgy around the rocks. Now, the provision that the local authority found for him was to go to a nursing home 1 day a week. So there he was, age 45, early stage dementia, sitting in a room surrounded by 90-year-olds with advanced dementia. And as you can imagine, his quality of life and actually his cognition, his MMSE scores were diving, not because his dementia got worse, but because he was profoundly depressed. So we went along to the local fishing club and said, does anyone fancy volunteering to take this guy fishing? And we described it, and someone said, oh, that's Dave, right? I said, yeah, well, confidentiality, data protection. And we said, well, maybe come to the office next week and we'll get you through the vetting. And I said, I'll sod that. And he just went and knocked on his door and said, want to go fishing? And it's a great example of the kind of social action which kind of bypasses organisations, and a good example, again, of one-to-one support. Because let's face it, one of you really, I thought, eloquently described the bus journey that you've been on. Everyone's sitting on their own, kind of like, and the evils of bingo. All right, bingo is not inherently evil, okay, but why is it that we assume that as soon as people get over the age of 50, we all want to do the same things? Now in the UK, everyone over 50 loves Vera Lynn, right, and talking about the war. Even though I was born in 62, my musical formation years were during punk, not Vera Lynn. So why do we, anyway, I'm on another hobby horse there. So one-to-one support, peer group support, being around other people with dementia. We hear time and time again, not only is that a fantastic inspiration for people, but it's a learning experience, and it gives out a really important message. And that message is, here are people who are living well with dementia. Now, I can stand up here and prattle on as much as you like about, the possibilities of living well. But the best way of experiencing that is to be with other people with dementia who are doing it as well. Okay. Crucially, I'd say, be a little bit careful, again, at a political level. In the UK, we have been too busy patting ourselves on the back for being dementia-friendly. And we have failed to notice that they are closing down the very support services that people with dementia need to live well. And, we are experiencing massive cuts to services. So don't let rhetoric about dementia-friendly become a smokescreen. One might argue that organisations in the UK tasked with campaigning vigorously for the rights of people with dementia, no, I'm not going to say anymore, but it's important to keep the pressure on, and don't forget that dementia-friendly communities are great, but people will still need specialist services, and they will need to be resourced. Okay, and finally, and most importantly of all, the voices of people with dementia must be at the start and the heart of the process. I've said it, I can't really say much more. It's a given, and we refuse to work with organisations that will not consult meaningfully with people with dementia. And that does not mean getting one highly articulate person with dementia in the very early stages to sit on a committee. It means meaningful consultation with people, including with people with more advanced dementia. That's Peter. So why do we need to talk to people with dementia? Well, because they got a right, for a start, to a say in decisions that affect their lives. You can't really hammer the message to your partner organisations, especially if you're an Alzheimer's organisation, unless you do it. So you need to lead by example. On a practical level, if you're creating a dementia-friendly community, a good place to start is where people with dementia already go. So in my hometown, for example, we found out that people with dementia, a lot of people with dementia, went to a local garden centre. How did we find out? Guess what? We talked to people with dementia. So that's not a bad place to start, right? So things they liked about it: it was easy to get in, the staff were friendly, and it was a cool place, you know, with lots of nice flowers. So we started there. And we then took the learning from there to the next place, and so on and so forth. So it gives you a place to start. Crucially, engenders ownership. Now, we know that people have a greater sense of responsibility for their communities when they are involved in creating and maintaining them. And crucially, I still matter. And again, what happens in the UK a lot is that prescribed disengagement. You get your diagnosis, the cotton wool comes down. But to give people that really real sense of actually what I say makes a difference. So that person with dementia that I did the walk on in that building that I showed you the photos of, I've just taken his words and made you laugh. And because you laughed, there's a little germ in there, maybe, hopefully, about really simple things that you could do to make a difference. And I'm going to report that back to that guy. What he has said has dropped a pebble into a pond on the other side of the world. That's going to be a big thing for him, I hope. A big thing for me. And crucially, if dementia-friendly means anything, it means including people. So those of you from organisations, what can you do? Ask yourself about your services. Ask yourselves, how do you really hear the voice of people with dementia within your organisations? Are your mainstream engagement processes accessible? You know, don't set up a special group for people with dementia before you've wondered whether your mainstream stuff might not be made more accessible. I mean, generally speaking, we work at 3 levels around engagement. Make the mainstream stuff as accessible as possible to everyone. Support people with dementia, with more advanced dementia, to engage in that mainstream process. And then set up parallel processes for people with dementia if you need it. Usually, we have a combination of all 3. Do you have a culture within your organisation that encourages people with dementia to join a peer support group, or even start one up, heaven forbid? Crucially, do the way that you provide services empower people with dementia to develop a narrative that goes beyond, here's a depressing leaflet, come back when it's really bad? Now, all right, this was what my father was told. You seem to be okay at the moment, come back when there's a problem. Which of course meant that there was a problem. Insane, absolutely insane way of approaching dementia support. We need services that inspire hope and confidence, because that is what people with dementia often lack most. And it's also what people with dementia need most, especially post-diagnosis. Hope and confidence in the idea that people can live well with dementia. So how do we measure whether we're being successful with dementia-friendly communities? How do we know? Here are the things we're considering at the moment in British standards. Public attitudes is a big one. It's fairly easy to do a fairly quick audit of what Joe Public thinks about dementia, and that would be a good indicator of whether your awareness raising is having an impact or not. You could look at increases in the number of organisations involved in your network, the numbers of awareness raising events, the numbers of media mentions. You could look at the involvement of people with dementia. Crucially though, I would say that you could have all of those things. You could have all of those things and still be a million miles away from a dementia-friendly community, unless you record and you measure the experiences of people with dementia. I remember back in the 1980s when I was involved in student politics, speaking to a local guy in East London where I was based, and I was talking about a local initiative, and he said, "Yeah, but it hasn't changed my life though, has it?" And that's a really important. It hasn't changed my life. Unless what we do has an impact on people with dementia and on their carers, then why have we done it? And I think ultimately that is the most profound measure of whether we have created a community in which people can truly live well with dementia, and in which a diagnosis of dementia might be life-changing, but need not be life-ending. Thanks very much.